Next up, we have Tina, and a big thank you to Tina for braving all the flight disruptions coming in from New York. And I'm so glad she made it here. And she must have arrived just a couple of hours ago, but that's not going to impact her presentation at all because she's one of the most powerful speakers I know. Um, as she's getting mic'd up, I want to narrate one incident. Approximately about a year ago, both of us were on the British Society for Aging Research conference. She spoke before me. She walked in with no slides, not even a single piece of paper, and she spoke for an hour. The rest of the speakers in that session, including me, we didn't have anything to say. That's how powerful she is when she is on the stage. She is an entrepreneur. She is an advisor to several nonprofits and for-profit organizations. She also is an author, and now she is a policy influencer, and then she is creating a new initiative combining longevity and AI. Over to you, Tina.
Wow, thank you, Jyoti. What an introduction, and thank you so much, really, for the invitation to be here. And yes, I flew in from New York. I was here on Tuesday, and I was in New York yesterday, and it was literally like dystopia. The smoke into the city, and all coming from Canada. And I felt quite guilty because I'm Canadian, and actually all the smoke was coming from Quebec, which is actually where I was born and raised. So it was a very strange day yesterday, and very glad that I made it at about 2 in the morning because my initial flight got cancelled. But so yes, we ignore climate change at our peril. So I'm here today to talk about a big initiative that I've been involved with pretty much over the last 9 months called the Quantum Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission. And really this is a blueprint to really look at how we can achieve equitable health and wealth around the world. Really this is looking at, and why being at this conference today, there are so many exciting developments that are taking place in this field. And I'm really interested in the collaboration that we need to see internationally to really unlock and unleash innovation at scale internationally. So why are we doing this? I wear quite a few hats, but a lot of what my interest is really driving a sort of a change from our sort of current sick care model more towards a preventative health paradigm. And I think we've got a real burning platform, certainly in the developed world, because we've seen, the general trend is that we're living longer, but actually life expectancy has started to, and I think there's a bit of an echo, isn't there? Is that okay? Am I okay? So sadly, and there's a chart on that slide there, sadly the trend is, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, the US and the UK, two of the richest countries in the world, we've actually seen a drop in life expectancy. And worryingly, and made worse actually post-COVID, we're seeing a widening of the gap between the poorest and richest citizens in healthy life expectancy. So that trend is actually getting worse. And so that little graphic there that I grabbed shows that the average American has the same chance of living a healthy life as someone from a place called Blackpool in England, which actually has the lowest healthy life expectancy, and it's one of the most deprived areas in the UK. So that's actually quite shocking, and I think we have to kind of do a bit of a reality check here to actually look at ourselves and the world and our politics and our governments and our business leaders and all of us to actually ask, well, why? How can this be? And what are some of the solutions? So this is what fundamentally has been driving a lot of my interest in this space. And I think, going back to, I guess, all the reasons why we're here, and I think part of it is that we haven't really leveraged the biology, but also the psychology and the behavioral aspects of aging well across the life course, because really, in terms of the determinants of our health, 80% of those determinants of our health lie outside of the care that we get in our hospitals and with our doctors. Yet the vast attention is actually spent on sick care. So we really need to address that. And so I see everything as part of a system change approach, that we have to focus on health as an asset to invest in rather than the cost. We have to recognize that we have an increasingly unsustainable healthcare system, driven in part, yes, by the aging demographic, but actually it is driven by inequities that we have in society at large. That burden of poor health is actually, certainly in the UK, but I would suggest in the US as well and many other developed countries, it's actually creating a drag on economic growth. You cannot have economic growth without a healthy population, and certainly in the UK that's been a massive focus of policy attention. So with the mission that we've launched, I mean, we have, and this is with my colleagues at the UK National Innovation Centre for Aging, we have launched and have said, you know, the time is now to harness the technology to really link health with climate, but with economic growth. And I was really pleased on Tuesday to hear Camilla Ricordi, who I didn't know but met after. He made that link between climate and health, because it is actually all interconnected. And he was also calling for this focus on prevention, which is better than the best cure. So depending on how you look at it. So really, I, and working with my colleagues at the National Innovation Centre for Aging, we launched this mission in November, and you'll see on the left of that slide, we placed an article in The Lancet, which you can all read. It sets out, you know, our kind of framework for how we're going to be approaching this mission. And actually, it's very, very linked with the UK's focus, you know, coming out of Brexit. As you know, we're no longer part of the EU. And we have quite an ambitious science and technology sort of framework and strategy, really, to kind of unleash, you know, the opportunities that I will come on to in a minute, including AI, quantum technologies, system biology, to tackle some of the big societal problems in the world today, and, you know, certainly in climate, but also health. And actually, to meet the government in the UK has a manifesto commitment of increasing healthy life expectancy by 5 years, and while minimizing the health and well-being inequalities that we have. So we've seen everything in terms of a concept called the exposome, which I'll come on to in a second, which was really about helping humans not only to survive, but to thrive in their real world. So here are some of the people, and some of them are here today. Here are some of the people who I've been working with on this mission, including some of the leading scientists and entrepreneurs in the world. And they were all co-authors on the Lancet article. And if you just Google Quantum Healthy Longevity Lancet, you'll find the article. And so most of those names you'll see. And some of them you'll recognize. So Linda Fried, Columbia, Luigi Ferrucci at NIA, people at the Buck Institute, and so forth. And actually, the reason why I was in New York yesterday is I was meeting with the American Federation of Aging Research, along with some other groups, who are looking to work out what is the strategy over the next 5 years that we can really take geroscience out widely, internationally, collaboratively, to really do more together. So I was really, really pleased about that, because I think, you know, for me, the collaboration rather than the competition is absolutely essential. And I'll come on to some of the reasons why. So just onto that concept of the exposome. So from my perspective, you know, to really drive better health, it really fundamentally links to a fundamental understanding of actually what us as human beings actually want from our lives, and our aspirations for what we want from our lives. And I think there's some really interesting and emerging links between the psychology, and there's many sort of really interesting sort of studies looking at this, but linking with the biology of aging, and actually, if you really, and I think some of that actually came out in some of the talks today, behavioral change for us to engage in our health is actually a fundamental challenge. So we do actually have to understand how humans actually behave in their real worlds. And actually now we have increasing access to data that will really give us the clues towards that, which I'll come on to in a minute. And I think one of the really interesting areas that my colleagues at the UK National Innovation Centre for Aging are really interested in is this whole concept around brain capital, like how we can harness, you know, the ingenuity and the expertise in all of us, and especially as we age, you know, to achieve our shared goals for increasing healthy life expectancy. So a little bit more on this concept of the exposome. So really, and that slide, that image there was taken from a paper published by Paul Shields up in Glasgow, who's been doing some really interesting work on the exposome and aging, and some really interesting studies looking at some very deprived areas in Glasgow and Scotland, really showing the effects of what deprivation and a poor diet actually can cause. And so really the exposome, it really reflects the exposures that we all are faced in our environments as we go through life, from even before death, and even the habits of your parents, actually have a bearing epigenetically in their offspring. And so really these exposures, they can lead to all sorts of things like, the chronic inflammation that we're seeing is one of the hallmarks of aging. But it relates to the foods that we eat. It's the air that we're breathing. And boy, did I see it in New York yesterday. Everyone was wearing masks. I think they've released 1 million masks now, to help to protect people from this fire, this pollution from the fires we're seeing. The objects that we touch, the stresses that we face in our lives. If you're financially stressed because of money worries, these all actually have a huge bearing on even your biology. So these are all the sorts of things that we have to understand more. And we also have to understand that some people are actually more or less resilient than others to all these stresses that we face in our worlds as we go through life. And I think this concept of resilience is actually getting more and more attention actually in the longevity arena because it really speaks to how we adapt to these changing circumstances. And we know that the loss of physical and psychological resilience actually varies between individuals, between tissues and organs, even within the same individual, and at different stages of their life, and of course with variations in their environments. We also know, and as part of this, that human psychology is really tough, and human psychology is complex, and changing behavior is really, really tough. So actually, one of the key learnings that is coming out in the field that we're in is, you really have to make choices easy for people and cheap, and to help nudge them towards healthier behaviors. We need to create those right environments for people to make those choices easily. So these are all factoring into some of the thinking in terms of products and services that need to sort of come into our lives. And I think, hope is really important too. And I was really struck by an article that Eric Topol tweeted out, and this is a few months ago now, that there's more than half of adults in the US actually take dietary supplements and spend an estimated $50 billion on this every year, with $900 million on marketing alone. And actually, there's very little evidence that these supplements actually do anything at all, yet we spend money on them. And a lot of that is because you believe you will be better if you take them. And actually, that all speaks to the placebo effect, but actually, some of my colleagues will say that if you do something to actively improve your health, that will actually automatically add 2 years to your healthy life expectancy. That hope is actually really important. And actually understanding that, we're actually getting more and more of studies that are actually speaking to that. And we also have to understand that, at the moment, there's no single drug or molecule yet that can actually outdo the effects of a poor lifestyle, bad diet. If you're poor, if you're stressed out by money worries, that will take 10 years off your life. So these are really important. And I think that psychological aging is also underexplored. So this is something that my colleagues at the National Innovation Center for Aging are actually looking at as part of this this mission. So let me just. So I'm just conscious of time. So there's some really interesting work by one of my mentors, actually, Alex Zavaronkov, who's the CEO of In Silico Medicine. So he's actually been looking at this whole issue around psychology, and recently published a paper involving 12,000 adults that showed psychological factors substantially contributed to biological aging. And they used a novel aging clock. He's very well known for these. But he showed that, and using this clock, he was able to measure that if a person feels unhappy, doesn't sleep well, or is lonely, it actually affects your biology. So this is the sort of stuff that is coming out in the research. So this points to the solutions that not only work on the biology, and I know there's been so much interesting stuff that we've talked about at this conference, but actually this whole phenomenon around our adaptability and our ability to withstand stresses in our daily lives. And we need solutions that will give us that hope that we can actually do something about our health. So that's another big part of what we need to be thinking about. And we need to make it easy. So we have convenience in our lives, banking, shopping. We need to make health really easy, and I think that's one of the real reasons why it has been so difficult to actually get more positive outcomes from a lot of the investment that we're seeing in lots of technologies, etc. So I'm just going to come on to some of the levers that we're actually pulling and using to drive this mission. And a lot of this is in the context of the UK situation, the context, but obviously working with our partners. And I'll go around these in turn. So we believe, and I've been in the UK for over 30 years now, and of course I've been doing a lot of work in sort of the policy domain, but also working with the scientific community and the investment community. I think we're poised, and this is at the heart of our mission, which we've set out in the Lancet article, to be the world testbed for health. And actually drive new thinking in the next generation of products and services to help us keep healthy. So, it is not a surprise, and a lot of that's been shared here in this conference. There are increasing developments that show that we need to move upstream in health prevention. There's been a huge breakthrough in the omics, the hallmarks of aging, as we know, better understanding of biological systems and human systems as a whole, and we've seen that, in the talks, and of course the huge explosion in the opportunities of regenerative medicine, all the reasons why we're here today. We also, and I have a particular interest in AI technologies, and of course we're seeing incredible developments in AI. I mean, most of you will have heard of AlphaFold's sort of, breakthrough in terms of decoding, and protein folding, and actually, these are incredible sort of tools that we can use to actually understand, what is happening when our bodies age and break down. And of course, we have, generative AI, and I'm sure probably most of us here are using ChatGPT, and of course that is already profoundly changing how we can do things in the future, with some risks. And actually, Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, is actually meeting President Biden today to look at how do we manage the risks of generative AI. And so I think the plan is to hold a summit in autumn about this, to take the lead in governance around the use of AI. So these are really important because there are a lot of risks, huge opportunity, things like data diversity and making sure we have the data reflecting our populations and really understanding that data are some of the things that I think are going to be more and more important. And I think these tools will help us to move beyond and understand, the biology of aging, but also, again, this whole concept of the exposome. How do we react to our wider environments? The other thing, too, which I think is really important, is this whole concept around citizen and consumer activation, and this speaks to the behavioral aspects of how we can keep healthier for longer. We know that health data is very plentiful, that we generate data in our lives. Obviously, big tech knows this, Facebook, Meta, etc., Google, and obviously that sort of data is actually, it's gold stuff for aging biomarker research, for example. And we have apps like Humanity.Health, who, again, is a group who I'm working with in the mission, that are using biomarkers and aging clocks, and actually give, targeted sort of recommendations at an individual level for how you can tailor your lifestyle to improve your biological age. What you should be doing with your sleep, physical exercise, etc. And these wearable devices and also all the technologies that are increasingly coming into our homes, they're large untapped sources of information and data. And actually, it's easy to get. And sometimes we don't even know. And of course, we share our data all the time, with the tools that we use with our phones, our watches, etc. And so we can collect that data at low cost, at scale, to really understand behavior. So it's not surprising that one of the big areas that have emerged is this whole concept around using digital biomarkers as non-invasive markers of health and disease. And they allow for continuous monitoring. They can also help us understand this concept of resilience, which I mentioned before, our adaptability to changes in our environment. And and so using these devices that are on us, they capture that data in a way that is effortless, and we don't even realize it. And that can fuel, huge developments moving forward. And of course, there are many organizations like the Aging Alzheimer's Research UK, working with the Bill Gates Foundation, using some of these wearables to detect the symptoms of dementia years and years and years before anyone knows it themselves. And it's that kind of understanding that will fundamentally transform how we can conduct research and actually benefit from that research. We've got a few examples in the UK. Many of you will have heard of UK Biobank, but there's some other initiatives. Our Future Health, which is actually at the moment recruiting 5 million healthy volunteers, sort of like All of Us, I think, is an initiative in the States. So looking and recruiting 5 million healthy volunteers, collecting their blood samples, and then being able to link that data with our medical records, which in the NHS concept is often called this sort of this gold sort of treasure chest of cradle to grave data. So all that is going to really open up innovation and enable us to predict and detect diseases far earlier in a person's life course. So the other thing that is really important, and this, so I'm going around this the sector, is on what I'm calling pro-innovation regulatory reform. So I mentioned the AI, and of course the Prime Minister and President Biden meeting today about generative AI, but we've got a lot of attention in the UK government right now to actually look at the science developments that we're seeing in science and technology, and looking at how we can make it easier to share data, because sharing data and getting access to data, that unlocks the potential of actually insights and innovation at scale. So this is all part of the UK policy, and are looking at rolling out digital infrastructure that will enable that data sharing to happen much more easily around the UK, but also internationally as well. And looking at concepts which some of you may or may not have heard of, but personal data wallets and intermediaries, being able to use apps that allow in one swoop for that person, that citizen, that consumer, to share whatever data they have on their apps, whether it's Spotify, supermarket data, they can share it with whomever they like, so no one else controls it except them. That suddenly unlocks this huge, vast opportunity to collect data from citizens that is secure, that is safe, completely consented, and enables to unlock, again, access to data. So these are the sorts of opportunities that the UK government are looking at, and which will fuel some of the mission. The other interesting thing is that the UK government has looked at the aging of the biology of aging as one of the key 7 areas that they want to look into. So some of the discussion that took place yesterday with the American Federation of Aging Research is how we can collectively, as a international community, develop consistent standards in aging biomarkers, validate them, use them, not just in biology, but also more widely, and again, tapping into that concept of resilience in the exposome. So really interesting efforts ahead. The final thing I'll mention is that the private sector, and so wearing one of the other hats that I wear, I run a social venture called Business for Health. We're looking at how we can mobilize companies and investors to invest for health. So this is this whole concept of bringing health into ESG. Many of you will know in climate, big companies, pension funds, institutional firms, they're all incentivized to invest away from fossil fuels, invest in clean energy. It's all part of this climate change agenda. Well, we're saying, well, we should be doing the same for health. It's actually, health has reached the same sort of sense of urgency as the climate change agenda. Just looking at New York yesterday with all of us with face masks because of the pollution, it's all interconnected. So we have to see the sense of urgency as also being very much linked to climate. So, so this health into ESG, and also unlocking some of the freedoms that the UK government are in terms of making it easier for pension funds to invest in health, that suddenly will start to open up much longer patient capital flows into long-term investment in health. So beyond the short-term cycles, political cycles, which is often one of the reasons why we don't have the system change that we need to really look at this differently. So these are all the sorts of levers that we're using in our mission. So just conscious of time, so what are we actually going to do in this mission? So we've got a concept, and again, it's part of this whole approach of using AI and quantum and all the frontier technologies that the UK government are really interested in, and which my international partners are really interested in. We're designing what we're calling the exposomic AI platform, and we're supporting an open federated approach so that we can really make it easier to connect up with all the vast data banks around the world. There are many organizations, including private sector organizations, who are all creating data lakes and data banks. We've got UK Biobank, Our Future Health, we've got All of Us, we've got all the different opportunities around the world to connect those data sets. We've got the consumer data, I mentioned the personal data wallets. All this data, we need to find a way to harness that data in a way that's secure, but it is possible now with technology. So what's difficult is actually the organizational and the sort of the will of and dismantling some of the vested interests that prevent us from actually sharing that data at scale for wider societal good. So these are all the sorts of things that we'll be testing out in a sandbox, looking at and bringing in investors, bringing in the regulators, and not just in the UK, internationally. So FDA, bringing everyone together, looking at how can we harness science and technology, how can we gather that data on our lives, how can we relook at business models, new investment models, reinvent and be really bold about this, because in the end, it's just not working at the moment. We've got many apps out there that really aren't doing the business. We've got many siloed sort of data banks. We need to connect, we need to collaborate. So these are at the heart. So being guided by regulatory opportunities and working with the regulators, working with the public, the consumer, these are all part of how we're going to be doing this. And just to close, because I've probably only got, a couple more minutes left, and maybe a few minutes for questions and answers. What is this? So what are some of the milestones that we're going to be looking at? And what are the key outputs? So one of the things which I touched on earlier is almost creating this global federated, sort of biomarkers of aging bank. So we're working with, the Aging Biomarker Consortium in California. I mentioned afar the FAST initiative, finding aging biomarkers through existing trials. There are many other initiatives around the world, looking at this. So we want to create this sort of mechanism to kind of create that federated access. And an atlas of sort of what we're calling geroprotective interventions. What are they going to look like? What are the interventions that work? And it's not, yes, it's new drugs, new molecules, but it's just as much about all the other factors, at an individual level that will hugely make a difference, like exercise, like diet. It's all these things working together at an individual level that will make a huge difference to our aging trajectory. Learnings from the mission. And we're taking almost like a cells to cities approach, because understanding, how do humans behave in their environments? How do they, how does that need to feed in, into policy, for example? New buildings, new homes, neighborhoods, urban planning, active transport, so we're using cars less often, more bikes. I was really heartened to see in New York when I was driving on, because I lived in New York for a couple of years actually, and this is a while ago, but driving on the highway and just seeing all the development that took place. It was a shame there was so much pollution in the air, but the cycle paths, everyone sort of walking and to work, these are the sorts of policies that we need to make it easier to move, to incentivize people to move more, to eat healthier, etc. And that feeds into a whole concept that, again, my colleagues at the National Innovation Center for Aging are pioneering on this idea of longevity cities. So taking that cells to cities approach, understanding how humans thrive in their environments, influencing policy, influencing regulation. How do we create that longevity city? And of course, we're seeing them sprout up around the world. Tokyo in Japan, they've got I think it's called the Woven City, which I'm going to hopefully visit actually in the next few months. But actually, my colleagues in Newcastle, and in fact, I'll try and send a link to for you to attend it on the 6th of July. They are pioneering and trialing a longevity city, but also exporting that around the world to Milan, Tokyo, Hamilton in Canada, working with the World Bank on this. So this is all what we're going to be sort of sharing on the 6th of July, and all of you are very welcome to attend. There is a time difference, but you can actually attend that to see the new thinking around that. And as part of that, there's this idea around creating longevity as a service. That will be the kind of products and services in our cities. How can we live healthier for longer? What are the sorts of technologies? What are the sorts of technologies in our homes? What are the new generation apps that will be easier to use, that will really make it easier and to nudge us towards healthier behaviors? So these are all the sorts of things that we're looking at, but very much are focused on what I call the wider determinants that have so far been given too little attention. All the factors outside the care that we get in hospitals. This absolutely must be factored into the new thinking ahead, and it is part of a system change approach. So I think, and of course, a lot of the mission is very much focused on data and getting access to the right data and using those frontier technologies. But if we capture that data from genetics, behavior, financial records, all of our sort of what we call life data, there are huge opportunities to really think very, very differently about, how do we, as a collective community, working together internationally, sharing data as scientists, but also influencing policy, how do we actually create this new vision of living healthier for longer? So very happy to speak with any of you who'd like more details on the mission. We're securing and very focused on getting public sector and philanthropic funding before we go to the investors, the private sector, but we actually want to involve everyone together in that sandbox to really look at these new models for the future, pro-ethical models for the future that will benefit people around the world equitably and fairly. And I'll close there. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but hopefully that gives you some thoughts and reflections and gives you a bit more insight into what we're trying to do with our mission.